When it's April in Southampton, we remember long ago, when the news came in that none would want to hear. Though there's no one left to tell it who would personally know, there's a feature in the paper every year. We read about the iceberg and the hundreds who were drowned. We read about the ones who made it home, and all the sad statistics of the men of our hometown, and their families so suddenly alone.
Southampton prides itself on being a maritime city, but does it emphasise enough that many citizens lost their lives in its creation? The docks once represented everything that Southampton stood for, an exciting place for people to be. Now, however, they've become industrial and uninspiring, and the heart of the city has moved inland. Whilst it's important to commemorate those who shaped the city's history, is it realistically possible to incite remembrance in an evolving Southampton? Most people are aware that the RMS Titanic departed for New York from Southampton, but far less are fully aware of just how much this tragedy affected the city. 4/5 of the crew were from Southampton, so a huge portion of the fatalities were local residents. Charles Morgan famously said that every street in the city had lost somebody, and 100 years on is enough being done to remember this.
Particularly in Southampton, I think it is important because it was a great tragedy and a lot of Southampton people died. Because communication obviously wasn't as fast and as accurate as it is today, to begin with they weren't sure that the ship had sunk, and then they weren't sure whether anybody had died. So it was only gradually that the news came through that people had died, and the only way that the families of the crew members who lived in Southampton could find out what had happened was to walk down to Canute Road, where the officers of White Star Line was, and stand outside and just wait. There was a huge national sort of outpouring of grief, really, but it was particularly so in Southampton.
The British Titanic Society is a countrywide organisation dedicated to commemorating the Titanic. Every April they host a convention, bringing people and exhibits together in the city responsible for the ship's docking.
Well, this weekend we're down in Southampton for our annual convention. The convention runs over the weekend of Friday, Saturday and Sunday.
Well, it's 99 years ago, the Olympic, 100 years in May, and they were very significant in engineering, in British engineering. It shouldn't be forgotten.
The Titanic was a real good news story for Southampton, and then a few days later it turned into such a bad news story. It's very difficult for the city. People ask why we don't actually celebrate it, and it's not something you celebrate.
She had 900 British crew. I'm not saying that they exclusively came from Southampton, but a lot did. And most were, as it were, breadwinners. And once they were lost on that, then the household struggled.
You asked why we don't celebrate the day with dancing on the dockside and a firework display. So many of our great-grandfathers didn't get away. We remember, we don't celebrate the day.
It's a wonderful story, but it was also a great disaster. There were over 1,500 souls lost that night. And they shouldn't be forgotten. They lost everything. Their families lost everything. And they deserve to be remembered.
Despite the wear of time, the Titanic is still very much a part of Southampton. Its legacy shapes the city to this day. Incorporated into the modern landscape are memorials, the city commemorating the tragedy that defined it.
A great ship was born, a sister for the line, a queen of the sea, the wonder of her time, the splendour of her gleaming decks was surely built to last, but who could know what would come to pass. As she went down on that cruel day, the band played on, gave their lives away. Came that April night on her maiden run,